Okay, it's 9 o'clock. I'm sorry, it's 10 o'clock. And I'll call the meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order at this time. And Cindy, you want to do the roll call? I guess you have the ones on Zoom entered. Go ahead.
Get it. Okay. Ed Schachner. Here. Sean Anderson.
Here.
Bob Long.
Here.
Kathy Leaf.
Present.
Kara Cook.
Present.
Tim Hall.
Here.
Paul Burning.
Present.
Rick Otino.
Here.
Bob Fiedler.
Here.
Dave Osnes. Scott Coner.
Here.
Dan Hansen.
Here.
Scotty Ard is absent. Greg Telejohn.
Present.
Dave Peterson.
Here.
Paulette Anderson.
Here.
Judy Achterhoff.
Here.
Shelley Tomschick. And Bill Peavy.
Here.
18-1.
Okay, first item then is approval of the minutes from the Wednesday, August 12th meeting. Any additions or corrections to the minutes as published? Seeing none, the minutes will stand. Business items. Review of the 2021 County Administrator recommended budget. Go ahead, Ken, take it away.
All right, thank you, Chairman Peterson. So we have 255 pages to get through today, so I'll be talking fast. So with our 2021 County Administrator recommended budget, we break the budget down into several pieces. I'll go over the sections of the pieces, not reading necessarily the entire pages to you. But one of the things on the very first page and then the table of contents, one of the things you'll note is that I broke it into and organized it by standing committee. So this just helps with distribution of the agenda when we go to the standing committees for those sections of the budget. But it also helps you look at it, you know, if you're one of the standing committee chairs or one of the members and you want to see the pieces of the budget, they're all sequential then in the budget. So we'll be going through the budget from front to back today, but that's one of the reorganizational changes that I was going to point out. The next section is the executive summary. So the executive summary, we try to present the budget in multiple different formats. So the executive summary is a written format. We have charts and graphs, we have line items with lots of tiny numbers, and so it's presented in different ways because everybody understands the budget in different methodologies. So this is one methodology if this is your preferred learning technique. So I go through and I write up the different pieces of the budget. I'll leave that though for you to review at your leisure. The next section then under tab 2 is the line item totals. And so this is the last 2 years compared to the current year budget by total. So at the top you can see the total dollar levy. So you can see the levy amount. And then you can compare different sections to prior years. So this is one way to look at the budget in a summary format. There's a couple of additional summary formats within this section. One is the legal notice. This is prescribed by state statute what needs to be in the legal notice. So the legal notice is laid out in that format, and it does show what the proposed tax levy is and what the impact is for the taxpayers. So I'm going to cover that just briefly here. So you'll see that on the bottom page of page 12 here. The county operating levy, $841,905. So that's the maximum amount that we're allowed under the state tax levy revenue caps. The debt service you'll see is a drop of $40,000. We'll come back to that more later. And then the special purpose levies are the library tax levy and the bridges. So $55,250 for bridges, the rest is for library. So you see the total dollar amount increase in tax levy compared to last year is 2.26%. So if you talk about did our budget go up, there's two numbers we're going to use. One is total dollars. So yes, there's a 2.26 total dollar increase in the tax levy. And then the other one is the rate. So the rate is that dollar amount divided by equalized value. You see our equalized value went up by 8.6%. St. Croix County has a very strong growth rate in property values. So when you divide a number that's up by 2.2% by a number with a denominator that's up 8.06, we get a negative 5.37% increase in the tax rate. So the tax rate dropped. So it dropped from $3.51 to $3.32. Now, how that applies to individual tax bills in all of the different taxing jurisdictions varies because every municipality is at a different level for their assessment ratios. We provide a tax rate, a total dollar amount, that 37 million that we're levying, we split that up based upon the equalized value of each of the different towns, cities, and villages within the county. They redistribute that based upon assessed value. And so when you make that formula calculation, you will not find a single tax bill that shows a negative 5.3%, but you will show some that are greater than that, and you will show some that are less than that. So you just have to understand that this does not easily translate into your individual tax bill because every municipality assessment ratios are different. So that's, in a really big picture, that's the budget in the big picture of how everything is impacted. The next page was Supervisor Long's request. These are basically the cliff notes to all of the budget changes by standing committee. So when we go through and we review all of the different sections of the budget, these are the highlights that you can look for that will probably be mentioning all of these items. So this gives you a chance to dig into the detail a little bit more and find where some of those changes were in a smaller scale. All right. When we get to the next section, so this is the authorized FTEs. This is actually a fairly important document that we use as a check and control with HR so that when we do hiring, we're not exceeding those totals. So every position that's authorized in the county is listed on here. And any changes that we've made, and I've reviewed these with the administration committee at the prior month's meeting, what those changes were, have been noted. One correction to that is in the ADRC. This change that I had put in there didn't actually happen, I guess. So we're going to fix that when we do the final version of the budget. But when the draft came out, the ADRC supervisor noted that and told me I was wrong. So we're going to change that. So there was no change at all to the ADRC position. So those two, the 4 and the -1, will be eliminated. When we look at total positions then, since there were no new position requests, we're going to end up nearly identical to the prior year. We're going to add a 0.6 onto there. So we're going to go from 631 to 630. So very close to the prior year. The last couple of pages then within this section that we added, one is kind of a big year picture to see what the trends are for our actual salaries and benefits, what we've been budgeting, so you can see where the trend is on those. And then we added an additional one. This was never really highlighted anywhere, and I try to be as transparent as possible. So we added a page in here, additional compensation categories. This is where all your overtime and shift differentials are. So these have been longstanding county policies and practices, not really listed anywhere though, and I felt the budget was a good place to put this document. So there is that list. All right, now we'll get into the PowerPoint presentation. Yes, Supervisor Osnes.
Can we go back to page 17, please?
Okay.
And under Health and Human Services, under ADRC, the 1106, I think you and I talked about that yesterday. Is that an error that we've removed the dementia care specialist?
Yep, and I highlighted that on the FTE list, so we'll fix that on the FTE list. I'm not going to make a dollar amount change. It's not really a significant dollar difference, and it shuffles so many other things through the budget to change that. So I will correct the FTE so that we're authorized to hire the correct amount. They will have a small variance within their budget that they'll have to deal with for 2021, but I don't think it's anything that's going to be difficult for them to overcome at all. So for the budget PowerPoint presentation, we'll go over basically these things, what the schedule was, the guidelines that we follow, debt, where the major changes are in revenues and expenses. We'll briefly highlight the authorized FTEs, talk about the benefit changes that are affecting this budget, and then that bottom line again for the taxpayers and what we look forward to for 2022's budget. When we look at the schedule for the budget, it really starts internally anyways before May, but May is when we start working with all the different department heads. We start with the KIP so that we can really get that out of the way before we dive into the operating to kind of split the pieces up a bit. So we start with the KIP in May, and then in June, we're wrapping up the KIP and we're starting to work with the departments to get their budget requests prepared. Department heads then spend a lot of time in July submitting those requests. In August, the county administrator sits down with all of the different department heads and reviews those requests that have been made. We take those to the standing committees in September for any feedback that they may have. October then is when the committee of the whole will see the full budget picture today, and then we'll have a public hearing on the budget and request your approval at November 3rd for final adoption. Really though, when we look at the budget, there's some dates really from August 15th to September 15th. That's probably the most important time period in the whole budget. That's when we're finding out net new construction, equalized values, we're getting our health insurance rates. So that's when a lot of the big data comes in. So up until August 15th, we're completely guessing. From August 15th to September 15th, all the pieces are starting to fit together and we're able to finalize a budget. But that's the process that we've used in the past few years, and that's the process that we had used this year. So those budget guidelines that were created back in May, we had basically three main criteria in those guidelines. One was we were expecting a fairly large health insurance premium increase. Our previous actuary had sort of hit us in like October, November of last year and says, well, your rates should be 10% higher than what I had them budgeted at. So we didn't amend the budget at that point in time. We left the rates as they were. We had enough cash balance in the health insurance fund that we thought we could carry that. When we got to this year's premiums and we reviewed it with the actuary, and with this year's increase, it only came out to 6.82%. So it was way under what we were bracing ourselves for, which is still a larger increase than we've seen in the past few years, 6.82%, but a lot less than what we had braced ourselves for. So the second point was a compensation increase for the employees. Every year the employees like to get a raise, just like every day my son likes to eat lunch. So they do like that every year, and we've been very successful in being able to accommodate that. This was the secondary change though. So insurance premiums were going to be the first priority. If there was anything left over, we were going to do compensation increases. And because that was lower than we had projected, we were able to fit in a whole step increase. So we did do a step increase, no COLA adjustment in the 2021 budget. And then the third part, which we didn't think we would get to at all, was new positions. So all of the department heads were very good. There were no new positions submitted in this budget, which made it a lot easier to create a balanced budget for you this year. There was a lot less cutting that had to be done compared to prior years because of that. So everyone's waiting a year before they submit requests. So those are the main things that came together when we started the process in May. Yes, Supervisor Long.
So with the step increase, what does that generally, on average, translate to in terms of percentage increase for employees?
Yeah. So just over 2%. So about a 2.2 to 2.3 is the average. Our wage grid has steps of 2.5, 2, and 1.5. So depending on where you are in the grid, we do have a higher percentage of employees on the lower end that are in that 2.5 range, and it gets less as you get higher on the grid. So on average, about a 2.2%. But it'll be one of those three increases that the employees would receive. And anyone that's maxed out on the grid at step 19 would not receive any increase at all, although that's a very small number that we have.
Judy Achterhoff.
Yes.
I have a lot of concerns about, I can understand why you want no new employees, but everything's going up in St. Croix County. Building, COVID, and that could possibly lead to businesses closing, homelessness, kids not having a place to stay, and et cetera. I mean, how much, is there the possibility, I assume there's always the possibility of being able to hire help if we need it, because we're asking the same number of employees to do more work. And we already talk about burnout.
Yeah, thank you, Supervisor Oshnerhoff. We can add new employees at any time. It would require a budget amendment. So when we talk about those authorized FTEs, we do not hire any additional employees beyond those authorized FTEs. Other than probably the one exception would be like with the public health, the LTE positions that are grant covered. So there's really no impact to the cash reserves that we have or the tax levy for that. So that's probably the one exception I can think of. Otherwise, we stick very closely to that authorized FTE. If a department requests additional help because they have escalating costs, they have to identify how they're going to pay for that position, and then come to the county board with a budget amendment, which requires a 2/3 vote of the county board. So it is possible, absolutely. Switching gears then to equalized value. So you can see our equalized value trend. So we were up 8.6%. And you can see this has been the trend ever since that housing market crash from 2007, where it dropped for a few years and then it's been going back up. And then inserted into that is our net new construction. Our net new construction at 2.71, I believe, puts its third or fourth in the state. I think it's third in the state for net new construction this year. We were first in the state last year. So St. Croix County does very well compared to a lot of our peer counties with equalized value and net new construction growth. Yes.
Okay, with regard to equalized value, are there factors that we can look at that would help us predict where we'll be in the next year or the next couple of years? Or is that something we have to wait?
Can't hear the question.
Okay, I'll say it again. With regard to equalized value, is it possible is there predictors that we can look at to know or have a feeling for equalized value in the following year, the following budget year, or perhaps a couple of following budget years on coming?
Yeah. So one of the predictors that could be used, and I used it at the city level when I worked at the city level, was building permits. So the number of building permits issued and the value of those permits was a very good predictor of how the equalized value would change. So we're dealing with a lot of different communities, but that's the driving indicator behind that. Really though, from a county perspective, because we're bigger and we have, where some might do better and some worse in other areas, we're more even in our growth rate. So really, we can probably put a trend line on the equalized value. You can fairly clearly see that trend line where it is. That trend line will continue. An indicator, though, would be if building permits change significantly at the local levels. Population growth. So St. Croix County is the fourth fastest growing county in Wisconsin. The first one would be Calumet, Dane, Menominee, and then St. Croix County. So 7.5% over the past 9 years. That represents our growth over the past decade and places us at fourth. So again, with equalized value, net new construction, population, St. Croix County is one of the leading counties in the state. So you picked the right place to live. We look at bond rating. Bond rating is very important whenever we go out to bond. The higher the rating, the lower the interest rates, theoretically. So we are a AA1, which puts us in that top 16 out of the other 42 rated counties. So again, we are at the top of the list for our peers.
Judy Achterhoff, another question. if you go back to the bottom, what would we have to do to get up to a AAA?
Yeah, we've looked at that. It would be almost impossible for us to get to that. Really, we would have to be triple in size. It's based upon size of the organization.
Okay.
A population base where we're at 90,000, we're just a little bit too small to get to that level.
Okay, thanks.
We'll get there, but it might be 100 years. I can set it as a goal, but long-term goal. All right, so debt. So an interesting thing about the debt, if you look at the far right column, you'll see 6 million, 5.7, 5.6, 5.3, 4.4, 4.3. That's the total debt payments each year. I call this a Kenwit special. So this is only reflected in debt structures that I've worked with in other municipalities. This is something that I've promoted and done, and the county administrator had gone along with me at least, and we've structured our debt payments this way. When your financial advisor first comes to you, he's going to offer you two options. He's going to offer you a flat rate, so the exact same payments. You can see that with our 2018 bond issue. It's the exact same dollar amount, practically, every year. So that's the first option that they offer you. The second option they offer you is an escalating rate. So if you see our 2016 bonds, you see them 300, 350, 900, and then they flatten out. So their theory is that your equalized value is going up, and so you'll have more ability to pay. So you can have a higher tax rate because you have more equalized value, more people to distribute that against. I actually have a slightly different philosophy. My philosophy is I want to see a decreasing debt service. There's a couple of reasons for that, three of them really. One is when you front load your debt and you see the 2019 GO bonds, you see 1.2 million, 891, 500, you see it actually decreasing. When you front load debt, your debt is lowers your total interest cost. So the faster you pay it off, the lower your total interest cost is. So when we reviewed the different options, and all of those options were reviewed at the admin committee back when these bonds were done, this had the lowest total interest cost, and that was the one that you ended up selecting then. That's one of the big benefits of it. Second benefit is that when we decrease debt payments, that's part of that levy. I showed you that levy. We have operating, we have debt, and we have special purposes. When I can have a decrease in debt, that has a decrease in our tax rate. Taxpayers love decreasing tax rates. Elected officials love it when taxpayers love it. So I try to set you up for success by having a decreasing tax rate built into our debt structure. And then the third part is if we go out for any additional debt, so say that we needed to pick up $400,000 of additional debt, say a similar issue to the 2020A, if we pick that up, we have a drop from 5.67 to 5.349. You can build in that first year of debt and then restructure the rest to where there's almost no increase at all in tax rate. So you can bring in a new bond issue and not raise taxes. The only thing taxpayers love more than decreasing tax rate is one that doesn't go up. So these are the things that are built into this debt structure. And like I said, this is unique to the way that I like to design it. And we're finally gotten to the point in our debt structure where we're seeing that step-down approach. Yes, Supervisor Long.
So the 6 million in debt service, that's about 5.7% of our operating budget. Is that, compared to other counties, is that similar, lower, higher? How do we compare?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that offhand. I think the answer is going to be we're very comparable, if not a little bit lower. Yeah, Supervisor Fiedler.
Just to answer Supervisor Long's question, I did check the other day with several counties. One of them I remember was Sheboygan. They were virtually identical to us, and they have just a few more people than we do. So they were at about 5.5, so about the same.
Okay, So when we look at major changes in the budget, so these are rounded off dollar amounts, just to give you an idea of where the changes are, not the exact amounts. So net new construction, when we look at where our revenue sources are, 840,000. Sales tax we increased, there's 450,000 of new money in sales tax. Interest earnings, I increased our projection for that by 125. We see more transportation grants coming in. Public safety vacancy rate, when we get to that budget, I'll point that out, how we did that. But that's, I'm really counting that as revenue, but it's a decreased expense. And then other budget changes amount to about 300,000. So I try to point out where the bigger ones are within the budget. When we look at the expenditure side, where are the increases? So step increases, 450,000. So the 450,000 though is a net of step increases because some departments generate revenue from their expenses. So child support, for example, recoups 66% of all of their personnel costs. So if I have a step increase, 2/3 of that gets picked up through additional revenues. So this is the net of that. So highway, 40% is picked up by others. The nursing home, 100% is. Child support was 66. Programs in HHS are different by program. CCS is 100%, whereas other ones like public health are 0. So it varies within HHS. The second one on here is union contract increases. So we're in the 3rd year of our union contract in 2021. The net increase from that union contract was 190,000. Health insurance premium increases, 300,000. Again, this is the net number because wages and benefits are picked up in some of our revenues. When we look at the general fund, CJCC and administration, there's some big increases in those 2 departments. We'll cover those when we get to those departmental budgets, but those are some of the cost drivers we have. Highway construction, there's a construction program that's an every other year basis. So 2021 is an on year, so we see a $300,000 increase in construction, and we saw an increase in transportation grants that offsets that. In HHS purchase services, $650,000. So this is an area that we're seeing a very fast growth rate. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the HHS budget, but that's one of our cost drivers. And then in public safety, software subscription. So we had a capital project this past year where we swapped out the software. The new software has a higher ongoing annual maintenance fee, but it had a lower capital project. So really we're stretching that cost out over a longer period of time. But we're seeing that hit the budget for the first time in 2021.
Judy Octoroff again.
Yes, Supervisor Octoroff.
Okay. On page, what my concern is overtime. On page 21, in the year 2017, we had over 220,000 over budget. In 2018, we had almost 180,000. In 2019, we had almost $370,000 over budgeted overtime. That's even higher than a lot of these major expenditure usages. Maybe it's from multiple departments, but how come we are so off between the budget and reality when it comes to overtime?
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is that we budget for overtime based upon what we think overtime demands are for deputies coming to court, for covering shifts when people are on vacation. What we don't budget for in overtime is vacancies. And so when a position is vacant and we end up adding a lot of overtime to cover that shift, we didn't necessarily budget for that, but we're saving on the wage side of it. So we save wage, we spend more on overtime. We actually save on benefits also. There is a magical break-even point on that when a position is more worthwhile to run overtime than to fill it. So that's why, though, that we are never going to hit the actual overtime that we have. It's vacancy rates. If we were fully staffed the entire year, we would be on target with our overtime.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about, one, that we're so far off, and two, what I mentioned in one of my previous questions, burnout. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, we don't intentionally hold those, other than we had the hiring freeze for a few months this year, but we don't generally intentionally hold those positions open. As soon as we have a vacancy, we start the process of filling that. So.
Hey, Ken.
Yes.
Yeah, Jim Ellsbury here. Judy, on my end of things, so we've got these projects that have been going on in the government center and other buildings. And sometimes my staff has to get involved to work with programming or getting in and out of spaces for these construction projects. So that's boosted my overtime up. There's just no way for me to have those things done by vendors. It has to be a county employee with them when they're doing work. So on my end of things, that's where my overtime has been coming from, is from all these extra projects.
All right. We'll move back to revenues then, unless there was another question or follow-up on that. Yes, Supervisor Counter.
I just had a quick question regarding, as we're seeing, the trend is, you've got a pretty good growth trend coming in St. Croix County. Along with that, of course, comes a percentage of financial needs for things like increases in mentally impaired and things that happen as these growth increases come. Generally speaking, it seems that those things, that you gain additional people that have these needs. And has those things been addressed as far as looking at that for the future and what our needs are going to be?
Yeah, I have a chart coming up in a few slides that talks about our FTEs, and you can see the trend in our growth in FTEs. So that's one way that's being addressed is through the addition of staff. And I know we didn't add any this year for 2021. We've kind of taken just a pause from that. But that pause has allowed me to add additional money into the purchase services, which was really lagging behind. And so it's a reallocation. So one year we're catching up on positions. The next year here we're going to catch up on purchase services, where the other big driver is for that type of service delivery. And so we are addressing it different years in different ways. But I think we can represent that to you in this budget as we go through it. Again, these are revenues. We've talked a lot about these. It's just another way of breaking it down. Maybe this will be the way that you understand it best, but we can see our net new construction and property taxes. You can see sales growth, transportation grants, state charges for services. We actually see a decrease in that. Interest and insurance recoveries, you can see an increase there. So those are some of the revenues and where you can see them increasing at. When we look at the county kind of as a whole, as a big picture, where do our revenues come from? So a third of it, 35%, is coming from property taxes. Sales and other tax, so this is the vehicle registration fee, would be 9%. So just a little bit under half is coming from different types of taxes. Charges for services are 18%. Fund balance is 4%. So this is the breakdown of where the revenue comes from the county. You can see grants and aids too at 13%, a fairly small percentage of the total. When we look at revenue sources by the different major cost areas, it's a different picture really by area. So HHS, they have charges for services that are a third. Their state and federal aids are a third, and property taxes are a third. When we look at highway, 46% is charges for services, 15% is state aids, and then taxes are 39%. So a different picture when we look at public safety and general government. So they don't have as much revenue generating capability. So public safety, 95% is supported by property taxes. And general government, we have about 80% there, 75, 80% that is by property taxes, 67.
Judy Acroft again.
Yes.
Where's community development in here? You have all the four departments except for that one.
Yep. Community development is part of general government.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. When we look on the expense side, again, some of these are a repeat, but when we look at general government, you can see there is increases from CJCC to administration. You can see internal service fund, the HRA elimination, and other health fund changes. We're seeing a decrease in internal service funds. The capital projects, the KIP, you can see. When we look at public safety, one of the expense drivers is that software, the sheriff's technology. Health and Human Services, you can see a total increase of over $1 million there, but $650,000 of it was the purchase services. So that's that major cost driver. And then in highway, when you see their increase, a lot of that is that road construction program that alternates every other year. And then looking at the big picture for expenses, where do our expenses go?
Excuse me, Supervisor Hall has a quick question.
Yes, Supervisor Hall.
Back on the previous slide, I'm wondering what conservation and development, what items are covered underneath that? Forgive my ignorance.
Yep, conservation and development is our parks, zoning, recycling program. Let's see.
And that went down.
Yep, that did. And we'll go over that. There was some programming changes that the department head had made that is reflected there. But their budget actually was a decrease from the prior year.
Thank you.
So total expenses, when you look at where does all the money go for the county, and you know, we can identify individual department heads that are responsible for this. So Health and Human Services is 30% of our entire budget. So Bob Rohrt, he's got 30% of the entire budget under his jurisdiction. Highway has 17%. So Robbie has 17% of that entire budget. The sheriff has 14%. Public safety is 14%. Everyone else is the combination of the remaining of those. So when you look at our big department heads, those are the three big ones that we take a look at. I also take a look at the expenses by how does it get spent. So salaries and benefits, so salaries are 36%, benefits are 15%. So we're looking at, you know, just over half of the total budget is personnel. It's personnel driven. Debt is only 6%. Capital, those are the capital improvement program that we have. That's only 4%. And then service and supplies, that's basically everything else, is the other 39% of the budget. This is the authorized FTEs. So this would be reflective for you. You can see this trend line. So when we talked about the growth of the county in population and equalized value, you can also see the increase in the employees. We went from 560 employees up to 630 employees where we're currently at over a 5-year period. So that's reflective of that growth rate. So that additional staffing has been going to address the additional service demands that we have. And while we do have the 1-year pause where we're not adding additional staff, those monies were allocated to other areas of the budget that needed attention. Benefits, so we just mentioned that benefits was one of the big costs when we look at personnel. So I did want to just highlight what those plan changes were. So health insurance, we're seeing a 6.82% in the premiums. We'd originally projected 10 to 15%, so it is lower than that. Some of the plan changes we did that were reviewed by Health and Wellness and eventually approved by the administration committee is we switched from an aggregate to an embedded deductible. What that means is, so if you have a family plan with a $1,500 deductible, one person in that family had to meet all $1,500 under the aggregate. In an embedded deductible, it's $500 per person. So if you have 4 family members, any one of them will stop at $500 instead of the $1,500. And then the other members pick up individually their $500 till the whole family hits $1,500. That's actually an enhancement for the employees. As an offset for that, we did increase the out-of-pocket maximums and increased a separate pharmacy copay. with separate out-of-pocket limits. A couple of additional enhancements then are we added a pharmacy tier for preventive with a $0 copay. So if you're on a maintenance drug, we want you to stay on the maintenance drug so that you don't get off and have larger health issues. So we changed that copay to 0. That was an enhancement. And then we increased the supply from a 30-day to a 90-day supply. When you just stock up more early on, that's an enhancement. It's the same cost though either way. And copays for ER visits were increased from $150 to $200. And then probably the big one was that we sunset retirees' eligibility to stay on the county's plan. And we put a sunset of July 1 of 2021 on there. So we gave them 1 year to make that decision if they're going to retire and stay on it, or if they're going to retire after that day. They do have other options available to them that have always been available to them. Staying on your current health insurance plan was probably just the easy one. But you can go on to the state health insurance plan if you make that decision within 60 days of retirement. And then there is the marketplace where employees can get health insurance if they don't like that option. So this will, in the long run, save us quite a bit of money. Retirees, law enforcement can retire at 50, 55 for general employees. They can stay on until Medicare eligibility. So we can see employees on there anywhere from 10 to 15 years. But the whole group as a whole, people at the higher age bracket tend to have higher costs than people on the lower end. So really, they're a higher cost driver than the average premium. So by phasing the retirees off of our plan will save money in the long run. Dental premiums were up 9%. The employees do pick up 75% of that premium. And then WRS contributions, I added on here, there's virtually no change, just 0.1% on the protected, but it's one of the bigger benefit costs, so I added that on just to show that there wasn't a change. When we look at the mill rate, this is the other goal that I have for us. So you can see that our mill rate is going to drop to $3.32. That's a 5.3% decrease. This is the 7th consecutive year of a decrease. And we are only 30 cents off of our record low of $3.02 that we had set back in 2007, right before the housing market crash. But we're going all the way back to 1975 here with the data that I could find. So I'm projecting that within a couple of years, we're going to set a new low. So that's the goal that I have anyways. If you don't agree with me, you don't have to. Yes. All right, so impact on the taxpayers. We had talked about this a little bit before. This is right off of that legal notice that we post. So we show where the operating levy is up. We're showing debt service is down $40,000. So I had said that our debt service was $6 million. I'm offsetting part of that debt service with fund balance that we had in the debt service fund already, so that we're actually seeing a decrease, a small decrease this year. And then the special purpose levies, that $20,000, that's libraries and bridges again. So again, a 5.37% decrease in the rate divided by the 8% increase. So the average taxpayer, and again, I explained that it's different for every municipality and every taxpayer, but the county rate will be dropping by $7 on average. So if I said if you average everyone out, the average home across the county, they should see a $7 decrease in the county's rate. Final slide on the presentation part, and then I'm going to turn it over to Leah. So 2022, so we're looking ahead for that. There is a column in the budget where we project out. If you look back at our projection last year, it's really not too far off. So this second year projection in the budget is beneficial. And I'm looking at net new construction continuing on at the same rate. I know this year has been kind of a different year, but we haven't seen really that decrease in construction. Everything I've been hearing is that construction is still continued on at the same rate it has in the past couple of years. So I would anticipate net new construction staying at the same rate. Sales tax, they are projecting a dip year in 2021 for sales tax for us. 2020 is going to be a really high year, and they're saying 2021 you won't see as big of an increase. We always shadow, though, the state recommendation, and we do that for a couple of reasons. We don't go up to the exact amount that the state projects that we'll have. For one, if we did say that's the rate we're going to have, and we end up with an economic recession, like we were looking at earlier this year, I would have to start cutting programs and personnel in order to stay within budget. So by leaving a cushion in that sales tax, I can weather an economic recession. The other reason then is we finish in the black every year, and I come back to you with a fund balance transfer where we can reallocate those monies and move those over to the KIP and help pay the KIP. So that's the other benefit of that is I'm recession-proofing the county with having that lower sales tax growth, and I'm creating a funding vehicle for the KIP by staying within budget then. But that being said, I still think we'll see another $500,000 in sales tax growth that we'll be able to budget for in 2022. Health insurance premiums, I'm thinking 5%. Step increase on average about 2%. Debt service levy will be down $100,000 from where we are this year budgeted. We will be negotiating a new WPPA union contract, so whatever that dollar amount will have to be plugged into here. I don't anticipate any significant increases in operating expenses. Last year we knew that that new software for the law enforcement was coming on board. I don't see anything like that going into 2022. There will be pressure on new positions though. So I'm sure I will be flooded with requests next year for new positions, and so that'll be one of the things that we'll have to take a look at. Are there any questions to this point through the budget? Supervisor Hanson.
You showed a decrease or a smaller increase in benefits, in health benefits, and you talked about putting money into the purchase services. Was that intentional?
Yes.
Is that a relationship that's intentional?
It's not related to the purchase services. The 5% projection is smaller because that's what I think it's going to be. We have some new initiatives with our health insurance program. We're incentivizing employees to make smart health insurance purchasing decisions. So if an employee is going to have a knee surgery, it's usually not, you have to have surgery right now, wheel them into the operating room. It's, all right, what does your calendar look like? We need to get this on the schedule. So if you have time to make that decision of when you're going to get the knee surgery, you also have time to shop around. So we've contracted with a vendor that the employee is then able to call, review what their medical diagnosis is, and the vendor will say, well, these are the different service providers in your area. These are the ratings of them, and here are the cost difference between each of them. If you take the lower cost provider on here, which doesn't mean they're the lowest rated one. A lot of times they're the highest rated one because a doctor that does, 1,000 knee surgeries a year actually probably does that knee surgery better than a doctor that does 10 knee surgeries a year. But they can do it more cost effective because that's all they're doing. So if they can go to that lower cost provider, we're going to offer them a cash incentive to make that purchasing decision. So they could save $20,000 in our health insurance plan for switching to a different surgeon, and we'll pay them $200 to make that choice. So that's why I think our future health insurance premiums will be more reasonable. Yes. Other questions on the budget up to this point?
Yes, Supervisor Otino?
Yes.
Yeah, going back to the very beginning, page 6 on our point number 2, the fund balance. Seems like we're keeping an awful lot of extra money in the fund balance because it's supposed to be at 35 plus or minus 3%, and we're at 44.2. Can you explain that?
Yep. So just at the last county board meeting a couple of weeks ago, we reallocated $1.9 million out of that 44%, which will bring us down to 38%. So we do look at it, it's after the fact though. We look at where we are at with fund balance and reallocate those dollar amounts. So the $1.9 million was allocated to the capital improvement program, and that will help us in the long run because that'll help us avoid debt issues, or at least the size of the debt issues will be reduced.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Yep. Okay, and like I said, I'm going to turn it over to the interim finance director, Leah Simonton, and she's going to go over some of these sections so that my voice gets a break.
All right. Well, good morning. This should be the fun part, right? All right. We will start with a quick overview of how the budgets are put together for each department. You'll see in the front of each individual department there is this overview that the department heads did put together. This will highlight each of the different aspects of their department that they would like you to know about. So there's some pictures in here, and then some highlights, narrative of the highlights too. So you can, I will not go over these, but you can look at them at your leisure. And then let's see, we will start with the first one. I will go over and just kind of give you a brief introduction of how these are put together and the different things we'll be looking at. So that you will see that we have 2018 and 2019 actual numbers in here. So these are the final actual numbers for each of those years. The next column we have is the adopted 2020 budget. So that's what was adopted last year. And then the following column is the expenses year to date. These are effective as of the date this was printed, and this was printed on September 28th. So these are the expenses and revenues that were entered in as of that day. Next, we have the requested 2021 budget. This is the budget that the department heads had gone through and put together. This is what they are requesting for the upcoming year. And then the following column is the recommended. So this is the county administrator's recommended budget. So you will see some changes in between these two columns, which was decided after the meeting with the department heads and any recommendations that came out of those meetings. The following is the 2021 adopted. So after the county board meeting in November, after this whole budget is adopted, we will populate those numbers, and those will be the final numbers for 2021. And the last column you'll see is the projected, and that is what is projected for the for 2022. Okay. The beginning, if we go down a little bit further, here you will see all of the revenue. The revenue is at the top of each different department. Those revenue numbers are easily identifiable. They always begin with the number 4, so you know. And then if we go down, there'll be salaries, wages, and then your fringe benefits. And then the operating will be low. Those are all of the expenses for each department, and those expense numbers will always begin with the number 5. So the revenues begin with a 4, so those you can see, and then the expenses begins with 5s. Okay. So it's kind of a brief overview of how each one of these sheets are put together, and then now I'll go into each of the detail. So as you can see so we'll start with 1210 Circuit Court. Their adopted budget for 2020 was just over $1 million. The department had recommended or requested just over $1 million, so $1,019,000. And then you can see a slight decrease in that number down to just over $1 million. And the reason for that decrease is, if you go down just a little bit here, I believe it's on the next page. You will see down here in operating supplies, that number from requested to recommended did go down a little bit. So that is the reason for the decrease from the requested to the recommended based on the meeting that was held with the department head and the county administrator. Okay. Are there any questions on this department? Once we get into this, we'll start moving a little bit quicker going through these. So that's kind of how we'll go through them. Okay. Next we have CJCC. So Department 1250. And here you can see the 2020 adopted was $96,000. The requested was just just up a couple thousand to 98, and the recommended did go up by up to 170,000. So what was determined in that meeting is that additional professional services, if you go down to expenses here, whoops, this one, other contractual services. So this is for a contracted employee for the day reporting center. So instead of hiring on an additional employee, we move some of those dollars into the purchase services, contracted services, so that we can hire, instead of having our own employees, we would actually contract that out for now, since we did not add any new positions into the budget for this year. So that's a way that we can go and get that additional service without actually increasing our FTEs for the current year.
Judy Ochterhoff, question.
Yes, Judy.
Did we, for all the ones where we did contractual services, was there a hopefully brief and quick study in regards to it would be cheaper to have contractual services or cheaper to have an employee from St. Croix County?
Yeah, Supervisor Ochterhoff, this is the only one in that category. So it was recommended as a contracted position, and Mike O'Keefe, I think, is on, can probably speak to the vendor that they're looking at using for that. But it's a specialty service, really, that they're looking at to provide enhancements to the interaction at the day report center. So instead of an additional deputy doing it, we're going to contract with an organization that has really more social work skills in those interactions. So that's the reason for that, and we're going to evaluate that position and that contract over the next year and determine really what we think works best. So we're kind of doing it on a trial basis.
Okay, and you said that this is the only contractual service that out of all the county areas, departments?
Yeah, I guess the other one I would add would be maybe the district attorney's office, where we're converting from a half FTE to contracted services. We'll cover that when we get to that, but that'd probably be the only other similarity. Yep. So this is the only new one that we've put into the budget.
Okay, thanks.
Next, we will have Department 220, Clerk of Courts. Here, the adopted budget for 2020 was $770,000, requested was $772,000, and the recommended was $797,000. The increase on this one that I want to point out is actually on the following page, and it's on the top of the following page, the legal services line. That was actually increased. If you can see the historical trend from 18, 19, and actually where we are at currently in 2020, you see that we are exceeding the budgeted amount for legal services, as those increases, or those services are increasing in cost. So we did go ahead and add an additional $28,000 to that line item for those services. That's really the only thing I want to point out on this department. Any questions? Next, we have 1240, the medical examiners. The adopted for 2020 was $284,000, requested was $330,000, and recommend was $326,000. So just a little slight decrease from the requested. One of the increases that I want to point out on this department is down in expenses here. This is for professional services. Let's see, kind of at the midpoint of the page there. This is to increase the amount of autopsy costs that we predict that we're going to have in the upcoming year. I believe last year it was determined that there was going to be an increase, a continual increase in autopsy services, and though this is to help cover those increased costs for the upcoming year.
Supervisor Hall has a question on that.
Yes, Supervisor Hall?
Do we know what's driving that increase? Is that just general population growth, or are we serving other counties?
Population growth. Supervisor Hanson?
We have did we approve on the KIP, the machine, I don't remember what it's called, but it's effectively a,
Yes. I believe that was approved, right? Yeah.
when is that coming on board? And will that affect this line item?
Yeah, that's on that grant. Let's see. So that is grant contingent, and right now that is scheduled for 2023. So, yeah. Right. 21. Oh, sorry, 2021. Next year. Wrong line item. Tiny print. Yes, that's what's, the autopsies are going up, so that's just going to, this is just trying to take care of that, those increased costs. According to the medical examiner. Any other questions on the medical examiners? Okay. We'll move on then to district's attorney. So this is on your page 65. Their 2020 budget is $998,000. Requested is just over $1 million, and the recommended is staying the same, just over $1 million. Couple things on this one. Ken already alluded to part of it. You'll see the adopted for 2020. Their net wage and fringe was 1.1 million, just over 1.1 million. And those did decrease in the recommended column, so it's down just slightly. And the reason for that is what Ken had spoke about earlier was the 0.5 position. That was a county budgeted position, and for the ADA, those dollars, now that the state is paying for that position in full, those dollars have now been reallocated. And so if you go down to the legal services line just a little bit further, the cost of that position is added into the legal services so that we can use those same dollars to help out in case we needed the additional service. So the dollars are still essentially there, just kind of reallocated. Supervisor Hanson?
Didn't we just fund a copy machine, a really expensive copy machine? Why is it we're spending $3,500 for copying if they just bought a really expensive copying machine? I'm not understanding how that works.
Yeah, so the overall, so this is legal services. So this would be for a contract attorney. So the ADA positions are paid for by the state. ADAs are state positions, as is the district attorney. Those are state positions. St. Croix County had on our books for a number of years a county ADA position. Fairly unique in the state. I think there's only 2 or 3 maybe in the state that funded their own ADAs. Probably about this time last year, the state came out with a list of new state-paid ADAs. St. Croix County was awarded an additional ADA. We kind of knew, or at least suspected, that we were going to get one, so we had reduced our ADA last year from a full-time position down to a half-time position in anticipation that we were going to get one. We didn't want to eliminate it entirely just in case the state didn't come through. But now that the state is paying for that ADA, what we're doing is we're eliminating the other half of that county ADA employee, but we are moving the funding to legal services. So if they still end up with a need to bring in an additional attorney assistance on a particular case or for particular services, they have the budget capacity to do that.
I'm sorry, maybe I was mumbling. I was talking about line item 53120. And I remember it was just a couple years ago we bought a copy machine, a really expensive one, and they had been asking for it in the KIP for some time, and I'm wondering why they're spending that much money making photocopies.
So I gave you a really good description for a question you didn't ask.
Yeah, it was a great answer. I was so fascinated with that answer, I didn't interrupt you.
It was a question that somebody was probably thinking of.
Well, that was the question I was anticipating, so I guess I jumped to what my thought was instead of what your actual question was. So to answer your question, Supervisor Hanson, the $3,500 is the maintenance agreement on that copy machine.
Darn expensive copy machine. Thank you.
All right, now we got that out of the way. Any other questions that Ken will answer for a different question?
Should be asked.
Yeah. Okay. We will move on to child support. For the general property taxes for child support, you will see that there is a negative number. That is due to the fact that they bring in more revenue than they expend. So they are actually making some dollars for the county. Those dollars actually get reallocated to other departments in order to help fund them. So if we did not put in the negative number, they would have an unbalanced budget. In order for them to zero out, what we do is we put in those additional dollars as a negative number. They get reallocated and go back into the pot of money that gets dispersed to the other departments. So that is the reason for that. Really, there are no major changes in the child support department. The reason for the decrease in the negative number is due to just the increase for salary and wages and benefits. Supervisor Hanson?
Is it considered an enterprise fund?
No.
Just
It is
happens
not.
to work out that way.
It just happens to work out that way, yes. Okay. Now we'll get into the sheriff's department. For 2110 for law enforcement, you can see their adopted budget for the current year is $7,449,000. The requested is $7.7 million. And then the operating is that same $7.7 million. So you see quite a bit of a uptick in that general property tax line. And this is mainly due to the increase in that maintenance service agreement that Ken had spoke about earlier. So if you go down, let's see, to the second page part of that, you will see about halfway through the page there, software and subscriptions. There's $269,000 that was added to their budget in order to maintain the new equipment that was put in. I mean, they have some other shifting around of dollars here and there, but otherwise that's the big item for their department.
It's a one-time shot?
It's a yearly. So that once it's in here, it's in here. Yep.
270?
And then give or take, it might influx depending on rise in costs, but yes. For the maintenance agreements, yes.
And some of us weren't around when that decision was made. Can you give us a little detail on what that new system is or what it does?
Sheriff, would you like to answer Supervisor Long's question, please?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good morning. So our original, and I'll call our RMS system, our records management system, we had purchased that when I was still in the jail. We started that October of 1998. And we've had that same records management system since. It had come to, in essence, the end of term of any upgrades to that system. So we went out and we looked at if we should move up to another tier of our current records management system, or if we should look at an entirely different records management system. And it made more sense for us to move up another tier, adding and really reconfiguring the whole system. But in this one, we included fire and EMS as well to be on that same platform. So now we can communicate and share information amongst not only
the sheriff's office, but this also includes all the municipal police departments in it. Again, as I said, fire and EMS, but also the dispatch center is also on board. That was a huge component as well. So if we make contact with somebody out in the field and say an arrest takes place, when we enter that person into the system in dispatch, it follows that person through our system. When they get to the jail, it's already there. Courts, the forms, domestic forms, any of the paperwork, it's already there for us. It's all in one big system. We go out to fires, we run license plates, we run information. Fire has that access as well. It's also got a mapping capability, kind of a GPS or a Garmin, so to speak, when we're responding, fire's responding. So it's kind of it's a county-wide system that I believe other than maybe 1 or 2 municipal fire, I think everybody is on, also paying a portion of that, and that'll be coming in the future. But so this is really an upgrade on something that for us was long overdue, and that's also included with the jail inmates. With that, we were also able to do some medical, because in the jail we also had other programs for the nurse, for other categories where we had separate subscriptions or separate computer-aided platforms. Thank you. So this was kind of an all-in-one that not only time drove us, but also the convenience of having the information. It was really a time saver. That may have been a long answer to your question. I apologize.
Supervisor Hanson?
That's a good answer. This is Dan Hansen. Do you have, do you need to buy a new hardware to run that? Have you had to have expense for training for the new software? And what will the annual subscription rate be for that?
So this is going to be the annual subscription rate. Everything, the hardware is also included in all of that, as is the training. So we've actually been working at this since March, I think we started. It's a company out of South Dakota. They've been up here, and weekly there's webinars. Terry Anderson, Brent Standard, and several out of the jail, as well as a representative from each municipality and each fire department have all been on board with these meetings. So the training is going, loading the information in, so that's all included, and the hardware will also be included in this amount that you're seeing.
I know you can't see me, but I'm nodding my head and smiling, so
All right.
sounds
Thank
like
you.
a good value.
Any other questions on the law enforcement? Yes, Supervisor.
Just to add something to this, I don't recall the exact details of this, and the sheriff gave a very good explanation of it, but last year, I think, was when the county board approved this, and as I recall the broad details of it, it had been a project to upgrade the RMS system that was scheduled for a couple of years out. And then, as I recall, the vendor came to us, and Brent Standard, who the sheriff had mentioned, worked very closely with them, and they were very creative down there. And to make a long story short, they wanted to make us a pilot. And as I recall, we saved about $1 million by doing it when we did it, as opposed to waiting a couple of years. So I think that in broad outline, I think this was one of the great purchases that I've observed while I've been on the county board.
Next, we have 2700 corrections and detention. On this one, the adopted budget for 2020 was 3.9 million. Requested was also 3.9, and then just the recommended was up to about just over 4 million on that one. And on this one too, you're going to see the additional maintenance agreement on this one for the software subscription and renewals to about $26,000. $100,000, and that is yearly tied into the same project. Are there any questions on this department? Then we have 2510 emergency management. On this one, the adopted for 2020, or excuse me, 2020 is $70,000. Requested was 69 and recommended was 69. So actually that was down just a couple $100. Nothing significant to point out in this department. They have remained relatively the same for the upcoming year.
Judy Alterhoff, is it, never mind, my question is for 260.
Okay.
2600.
Okay, I'll move on to that one right now if there's no other questions. For 2600 emergency communications, the adopted 2020 was 2.2 million. Requested is 2.3 and recommended was also 2.3. On this one, you will see net wage and fringe is up. One of the significant changes is up from 1.7 to 1.8. These numbers have been double checked and triple checked, and they are correct. It's a little bit higher than what most of the other departments are, but the numbers appear to be correct on that one, on those, and the net wage and fringe increase. Most of the increase was due to the wage line. For whatever reason, there's just a bigger difference in that category. Yes, Supervisor Peters.
When we finish this section, let's have just a 5-minute break for folks.
Sure. Okay. And then one.
Judy Alterhoff.
One more. Hold on. One more thing I wanted to note on this one is they too have the software subscription renewal edition, and so that one did go up about 11,000 on this one too. So you will see that increase on that one as well. Supervisor Achterhoff.
Yeah, I know that for years they've had a problem getting enough people to work, finding one and training them in, and then they leave. So is that being taken into consideration? I mean, what is their staffing level now? Is it at the level they want it to be, which is why there's no new positions, or are they short?
Sheriff,
So right now, we're at 17 people working on the floor. 2 of them are in training, and the 18th person that was approved for this year, we're doing the background on that person right now.
So if everything works out, 18 will be sufficient?
For now, yes. We also have 4 part-time positions that we've been allowed to have. Right now, there's 2 of them that are filled. One Saturday is their last day, and they're going to come back at a later time, hopefully when life changes at home for them. But right now, we're holding our own. I can't say in another year I won't be back asking for another, but with this new system that the sheriff hinted at, that we're going to hopefully see some benefits from that as well for my staff, but we need to have it fully operational to realize that if it's a true savings.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for public safety? Okay. And then Chairman Peterson would like a 5-minute recess, and we will be back in 5.
All right, we're going to get going again. Okay, so we're going to start back up with Corporation Counsel, everyone's favorite attorney. So one of the things Corporation Counsel always likes to point out during their budget meeting is that extra revenue that child support gets, you know, they generate more revenue than they have expenses. It's because they charge Corporation Counsel time for child support cases. That's part of their revenue generation. And so Corporation Counsel always likes to remind me of that, so I thought I would share. So the general property taxes for Corporation Counsel went from 592 to 617. They stayed the same for the recommendation. We're seeing mostly just net wages and fringes driving that cost. Any questions on Corporation Counsel? Otherwise, they're pretty static. All right. Administration, 1410. So there are some changes here that we're going to go over. The first one, so if we look at the 2020 budget, they had 299,000 property tax, and they're going to 451,000. So there's a couple of things going on in the county administrator's budget. The big one is the PIO. So that position was added as a budget amendment in 2020. So it was not reflected at the time that we set the levy for 2020. So now you have to levy for that position. It's 109,000 wages and fringes. So that cost is added in here. The other big change I would say that's in here is other professional services. So that was budgeted at $1,700 in the prior year, and we're budgeting at $25,000 for the next year. So one of the things that I would like to do with this line item is there's always something that seems to come up. A couple years ago, we did a grant analysis for the county. Right now, we're doing the National Community Survey. We're doing that with grant offset, so we're offsetting it. Next year, though, I would like to do a strategic planning session by bringing in a third-party consultant and really redoing our full strategic plan. I think we're at the point now where we need to really take a nice, good, hard look at that and set some priorities for the next few years going forward. So there are demands at times that require these consulting services, so this is the line item that I'd like to put that on. So those are the two big changes in county administrator. Are there any questions on some of that? The other thing, there was a third thing, advertising and promotion. You'll see $10,000 added here where there wasn't before. That's actually a transfer from the IT budget. That's where we do branding from. That was the branding budget. So it's a transfer from a different department's budget, but that is following the PIO. All right. In Fund 1010, this is the contingency fund. You're going to see that I increased that from 50,000 to 100,000. So when we lowered it this past year to 50,000, we ended up using it all up in one shot. And then we had some additional requests that did come in. We didn't have enough funding available to do it. So I did increase that back to $100,000. We were able to accommodate that in the 2021 recommended budget. For health insurance, you'll see last year we had $1 million of fund balance applied. I had talked about that a little bit earlier, where we had been projected at the last minute with a large increase. They said that we were underfunded. I think it was an actuarial mistake. We had a different actuary the prior year than we do currently. So we're back on track with where I think we need to be, and that fund should be self-sufficient with the rates that we're charging. The HRA fund, so this is the health reimbursement. We grandfathered or sunsetted this HRA in 2020, so you'll see nothing in 2021. I'm just leaving it on here because it has some historical numbers that still add up in all of the totals, but this is completely phased out now in 2021. The RHS, so the retirement health savings, this is the long-term sick bank money. When somebody retires, is paid out into a health insurance account for them to use for future medical expenses while they're retired. So our trend line is forcing this up, so I did increase it from 200,000 to 250,000. This is still lower than the current year payout and the prior year payout. If we put it on a longer trend line, it's probably marginally adequate, but 50,000 was about all the additional I could afford at this time. This fund typically, when it runs into the red, we end up doing a fund balance transfer to cover it. We do have some ideas of doing that in early 2021, and I'll be bringing those forward at that time for a fund balance transfer. 1540 is our liability insurance. So liability insurance, we do have a small increase in the total amount of liability insurance revenues and expenses that we're projecting. We have been seeing double-digit increases in premiums that we're charged. Premiums are only a part of the cost because we self-insure for a large portion of things. We have a $500,000 deductible on liability claims and $10,000 on vehicle and $25,000 on buildings. So we're really self-insuring, but the premium part is going up, and so that's what's driving this cost increase. Our actual claims have been really very good. Being self-insured has saved the county a lot of money, and having those high deductibles at the reinsurance level. Yes, Supervisor Burning.
The premiums going up, does that have anything to do with the absolute destruction going on across the country to municipal buildings and federal buildings and state buildings?
It's too early for that. The premium increases we're seeing are from police officer-involved shootings and the trend in court settlements on those cases. So,
and a follow-up question on that, are we expecting the premiums to go up after what's happened over the last 4 or 5 months?
I have not had a discussion with our insurance provider on that. So I don't know. I guess I don't know that. Theoretically, yes. I mean, it should have an impact on it, but I don't have any evidence yet to show it. Everything really lags in insurance, so.
We haven't had any claims, have we? I mean, we're still a good customer, aren't we, as St. Croix County?
We are now. So we had some very high claims to the point where our insurance actually thought about dropping us 10, 15 years ago. So
That's a long time ago.
it was a long time ago. I only know a little bit of the history on that. So we've been a very good customer. We actually haven't got into the reinsurance level in probably 12 years. So we're a very good client of the WMIT group. All right, so workers' compensation. So again, this is something that we self-fund. We reinsure at $550,000 per claim. We did get into the reinsurance level last year, and we might hit it again this year. I have a claim that's getting close to the reinsurance level. So it's really hit or miss whether somebody ends up with injuries or not. We did implement a new program with work comp that I'm hoping will help address some of the costs that we have as one way of helping to control the cost with workers' compensation. And we are seeing, again, premium increases on the work comp side. All right. So the blank pages that are in there, it's easy to print for me, so just ignore the blank pages in the electronic file. County clerk. So when we look at the county clerk, she covers the county board within her budget. So the 1110 cost center is the county board. You can see it's pretty close to where it was in prior years. There was a $1 amount that we corrected down at the bottom, and that was the only change in there. Otherwise, it's the same as it's been in prior years. 1420 is the county clerk's office herself. So that went from $176,000 to $186,000. The recommended budget's virtually the same. We tweaked maybe just a couple of line items throughout her budget after we met. But her budget is relatively unchanged from the prior year. 1421 is the dog fund. It's really just an in and out. We collect it and then pay it back out for the municipalities. We just put it in a separate fund so it's easier to account for. 1440 is the elections. I think there's an election coming up from what I've been hearing. Yeah, I know. Not all my jokes are funny, but at least I got a little bit of a chuckle out of the audience here.
Good chuckle.
Yeah. So
Kind
elections.
of a tough room, aren't we?
Yes. So the elections are cyclical. So every other year, basically, they change, whether there's presidential or governor elections. So you'll see it go up and down every year, every other year. So. Yes.
I will be over budget this year in elections because I budgeted for 4 and we had 5 elections.
Cindy's an overachiever. So. All right, human resources, 1430. So within this budget, so they were budgeted at 532, they're up to 549. The final recommendation was 547,000 for a property tax levy. You're mostly seeing net wages and fringes. The other thing that we added in there, we added in under consulting fees, an additional $5,000 is what it came out to, and we're looking at an employee engagement survey in that line item. And then program development down below, that one up by a little bit. Program development is our quarterly leadership trainings. And so we've been doing good by bringing in some really very good speakers. They do cost a little bit more, but I think the training we're getting for our leadership and developing those leaders so that they're able to be promoted within the organization will pay benefits in the long run. Information technology, 1450. When you look at IT, so they went from 2.2 million to 2.3 million. So there was a bit of an increase there. So you saw with software and other departments, and you see in the IT world, the technology increases are occurring. We have some of that cost from net wages and fringes. The other costs are related to technology increases. This probably would have been higher even yet, but some of the cost for the sheriff's department, prior software was in IT, and they've moved that to where the sheriff can pay for it all himself. So you saw a big number there. There's a small number came out of IT. So part of their increase was offset by those decreases, and like the $10,000 for advertising and promotion that was moved over to the county administrator's budget. So there were some offsetting reductions, but there is still an increase, and technology is a driving cost factor for us here. Finance Department, 1510. There wasn't anything significantly changing within the Finance Department. You'll see 703 to 729. That's primarily all within the net wages and fringes. There's been some personnel changes there that have maybe contributed to part of that. Otherwise, the operating costs are relatively the same as they were the prior year. Supervisor Hanson?
What do you use for professional services and finance? Let me make sure we got the same page.
Yep.
Line item 52190.
Yep, on page 123. So a couple of those big costs there, the accounting services are the auditors, and the other professional services is Cherry Road. And so that's a consulting services we use for the ERP. And so we have an ERP analyst that can do a lot, but she can't do everything. And so what she can't do, she has to reach out to a third-party vendor to do, and that's where that cost is from.
Could you tell us what ERP means, please?
Yeah, Enterprise Resource Planning is what ERP is. It's the software package. It was the $3 million software package that we bought that runs everything for the county. This budget is generated out of that software package. But everything the county does really is in that now. It's really unique. I've never worked for an organization that had a fully integrated system like that. We have the Oracle cloud-based system. So all of the financials are run through there. So everything the county buys, payroll is run through there. Our position recruitments are run through there. Performance reviews, training of employees. Everything is within this one software package. And so it was a big investment that the county made starting in about 2016. But that's the ongoing cost to fix things that come up in that software package. Oracle is a huge company. They have quarterly updates, but every time they update their software, they always break something. And so this is the line item to continue to correct those things. I got your question right this time? Excellent.
You can answer any other question you want to, too. That's fun.
All right, so the 4 zeros here, cost center, this is the, it's basically where I don't have a place to put anything else, but this is where sales tax ends up. This is where interest revenues end up, and some of our state shared revenues. I then create a negative property tax line, which redistributes that to all the other budgets. That's how I balance everything to zero. It's just sort of an accounting technique to do that. But you can see here then what our actual sales tax have been to what I'm projecting them out to be. The county treasurer is in 1520. So when we look at the county treasurer, they generate more revenues than they have expenses. If you look at 2018, you don't see that, but there was we change in accounting, not philosophy, but accounting placement of where we charge things. So that's when we moved those over. But interest on taxes and penalty on taxes shifted at that time. So you can see that they end up with a negative general property tax. It's relatively close to where it was in 2020, so not much is changing there. You see a slight increase in net wages and fringes, and a small increase also in the operating expenses. Our facilities department. So within facilities, you see a decrease in the total property taxes. So they had 1.886 million. They'd requested 1.74. We found an error in there, so it went back to 1.822. They had doubled up on rent revenue. If you can see that right there, we caught that. So with that correction, we look at where their expenses are. We actually see a small decrease in the net wages and fringes, and that's a reallocation of the existing personnel they have to the healthcare campus. And so as the staffing is projected, or as the staffing is projected to increase, but also as the bed count increases on the healthcare campus, more facility needs are going to be driven there. And so we've reallocated some of our current facility staff to spend more time at that facility. And so that facility covers all of their operating costs. And so that's why you're seeing a decrease within the facilities department. If we look at their operating expenses, they're almost identical to where they were in the prior year. Facilities also takes care of the fleet vehicles. This is really an internal service fund. So we charge mileage and then recoup that mileage. That's how we cover the maintenance and fuel costs for all the county vehicles. Any questions on that section? Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Leah. All right.
Okay. Next, we have the highway department. For highway, they did go up a little bit from the 6 million to about 6.1. A lot of those costs come from an increase in net wage and fringe. They are one of the largest departments with the most employees, so you do see a higher increase in that benefit for them. You will also see a little bit of reallocation of revenue from the LRIP administration for the roads, and then it goes, and then for the state transportation grant, you'll see a little bit of reallocation in those revenue dollars, and then their expenses kind of coincide with those. So about all I have for the highway department. Are there any questions here? No? I think you're back over to Ken. Oops, I'm going the wrong way.
That was 17% of the budget we just did in the last 30 seconds, so we're really picking up the pace now. All right,
We didn't
so-
want to be flooded with questions.
Yeah.
She plowed right through it.
Oh, there are some good jokes there. All right, so Health and Human Services, 30% of the budget, and probably one of the most complicated areas that we have. So we break Health and Human Services up into a couple of different ways within the budget. We do have, we start off with all of the 4,000 level cost centers. So that's all of Health and Human Services that are in the 225 fund, which is, I think, 9 divisions that they have: CCS, Children's Services, Economic Support, ADRC, and some others. So they add them all up here. So it's a good way to kind of take a quick look to see where we're at with Health and Human Services as a total. So if you see last year, we had budgeted $6.6 million for Health and Human Services. When the initial request came in, it was at $7.4 million. So about $800,000 of additional tax revenues that they were asking for. That's my whole net new construction. So I worked with their staff. We did get it down to just under $7.1 million, but there are some service demands that we're seeing here. And whereas we did not fill a lot of new positions, we did fill some of these service demands within the HHS. So we'll highlight a couple of them for you as we go through. So those are revenues. When we look at net wages and fringes, so they went from 15.5 million to just under 15.8 million, so about $250,000 increase in net wages and fringes just for that employee group that's in HHS. And then the really the big cost driver that they have is purchase services. So when we look at purchase services, our 2018 actual was 5.1 million. Our 2019 actual was 5.8 million. We had been budgeted at just under 5.2 million, and they'd come in with a request of 5.7, which is still under where we were last year. And if you project out where we're going to be this year, we're going to be right in that same neighborhood for purchase services. So I did add a little bit extra. So if you see from the requested budget to the final recommended budget, I did add another $60,000, $70,000 into the purchase services. And some of these are, one of the bigger ones that I see anyways is in children's services with foster care. So those are costs that you really have no choice over. The county's required, it's a state mandate that we cover those costs. And with opioid and methamphetamine and other drug addiction issues that we have within the county, that raises the demand on that foster care. So those are some of the things that are driving this. So when we talk about other things that we're doing, the CASA program that was adopted last year, we funded $50,000 for that CASA program. When we are providing additional services within the day report center so that we can treat and we can monitor the people that are having issues with drugs and alcohol, it all boils back around to other cost drivers that we have in the budget. And this is one of the areas, I mean, that's a $5 million line item in the budget for purchase services. So this is an area that you can draw a circle around, and things do come back to this. So a lot of the things that our staff does helps in other parts. So it is a big picture of the collective knowledge of all of our department heads working together to solve our financial issues. So those are the big changes that I wanted to point out overall in Health and Human Services.
Got one question?
Sure, Judy.
Yeah. Just, this kind of goes back to maybe something I mentioned earlier, but I don't know if it would come under this contractual services, but there's a huge possibility of a lot more homelessness coming up this winter due to evictions and people losing their jobs and whatnot. Have we taken that into account in regards to trying to find other places or other ways that we can guarantee home living, safe living conditions for people?
Yeah, that's a more specific question that I'd be prepared to answer. If Bob Rohrt's on, if he has any ability to give some insight into that.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Thank you, Supervisor Esterhoff. We recognize that is a major issue with COVID-19 and the impact on the economic status of a lot of families who are on the edge, that we anticipate a significant increase in homelessness. We had applied to be a pilot site for a behavioral health home model that would have helped address that to some extent by expanding Medicaid coverage for populations like that where we could serve them more effectively. We didn't get that pilot, however. So we're still looking at, I'm early in my tenure here, but we're still looking at ways to address homelessness, anticipating that it's going to increase. One of the things that we want to look at, as Ken alluded to, is addiction as a driver of some of those situations where people find themselves homeless. And how do we intervene, engage people differently who have mental health and addiction needs, so that we can prevent them from getting to the point where they're in a state of homelessness. This is a passion of mine to address this issue. We're early in the stages of figuring out how we're going to do that effectively. But I do want you to know that we're thinking about this every day.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Bob. So Bob Rohrt, he's gotten some really good reviews, so I think that was a good hiring decision that the county made. So we look forward to some of the program ideas that he has in his short tenure that he's had with us so far. When we get to the individual divisions then within HHS, you can see we break them each down then. So public health is listed here. One of the things that I did with the public health budget is I put in $100,000 of fund balance applied. I also added $100,000 in the state human services grant. I do know now that we are getting that grant, and that's for additional contact tracing, and so that's what that money was added for. We know that there's going to be additional contact tracing needs past the end of the year. I don't think this is going away right away here. So that's where it's reflected in the budget that we have accounted for that. I'm only budgeting for 6 months. That's my best guess from a financial standpoint of how this all works out. We will address actual reality as we experience it, but that's how the budget is being reflected. So basically 6 months, 10 contract FTE tracers are accounted for in here. Behavioral health, so the property tax, Supervisor Long.
Real quick, can we go back to page 151, line item 51210 wages? There was a pretty significant difference there, which is, if you could explain that real quickly.
Yep. So wages are the contact tracers. So that's where those 10 FTEs for 6 months of contract tracing show up on the expense side. So the revenue side I'm showing is state grant and fund balance applied if necessary. I kind of gave us two options there. The expense side is on that wages. And then you'll see a decrease if you look at our 2019 actual, you saw $769,000 in salaries. You saw a budget in 2020 of $1,011,000. And then this year's budget of $866,000. So I can explain that too, even though that wasn't a question, but I like explaining things that weren't asked. The 2020 budget was built on having 2 additional FTEs in public health that were grant funded. We did not receive that grant at the end of 2019 for 2020, and so those positions never were filled. They're not going to be reflected in our actuals, and now we're back to the staffing level we were actually at in 2019. All right. So behavioral health, we saw an increase there of general property tax support 1.758 million up to 2 million. We brought that down to 1.915. We do see a very small increase in the net wages and fringes. And then when we look at their other expenses, we can see increases, and where was it at? Yeah. Their operating expenses were about the same, so it was mostly falling within their net wages and fringes. Supervisor Hanson?
Under PTO pay salaried, I'm seeing that it's not extended through in 21. Why are you accounting for it in a different way?
Yep. So on that line item, so we're looking at page 153, line item 51140. So those are falling within the actual columns. So PTO pay is on a separation when somebody leaves. Their accumulated sick or their accumulated vacation PTO time is paid out. So we don't actually ever budget for that. We expense it here so that we can see it from a management perspective a little bit differently, but we don't budget for it. And generally speaking, we don't budget for it because after somebody leaves, there's usually a small window where we're recruiting before we fill the position. We don't have somebody available the next day. And the actual wages then offset that PTO payout. All right. 4320 is the CCS program. This is a relatively new division, and we've split it off now this year as its own full division with its own division directors and hierarchy of staff. This program is still continuing to be funded at 100% by the state. They do have a reconciliation process that kind of has a dollar lag for us. That dollar lag is reflected in the fund balance applied. So we can claim, I think we can claim 70% right away in the year that it's incurred, and that the other 30% we get through a reconciliation, which happens like 6 to 8 months after the fact of when those expenses were done, after they balance everyone within the state or whatever magic HHS is doing over there with their books. But we do eventually get that money back. But that's a lag within that program that we consistently see. And this was one of the ones where we are seeing increased purchase services. So we've increased purchase services quite a bit within the CCS program. We do have the better reimbursement rate when we can allocate a program participant within the CCS program versus maybe a different program we have. So we do gear as many people that are eligible into the CCS program. But that's one of the reasons why you're seeing that program grow faster than some of the others. Within economic support, you can see that relatively low amount of general property taxes. They are mostly grant funded, so they only have about $100,000, which is a small decrease from the prior year. They did have, net wage and fringe increase that we typically see, and then no change really in their operating expenses. Children's services, so we're going from 2.5 million. They originally asked for 2.9 and we got it down to 2.6. We did some reallocation of staff, I believe, moving them over from children's services to the CCS program. That was able to help reduce some of that cost between the requested and the recommended budget. And then this is one of the ones where we're seeing increases in the purchase services. So this is specifically what I was referencing. If you look at their fiscal year 18 actual, it was 1.9. Fiscal year 19 was 1.8 million. We were budgeted at 1.4. They'd come in with a request of 1.623, and we'd add 50,000 there, get them up to 1.673. So still under where we've been experiencing, but I only have so much money to allocate out. But this is one of the cost drivers that we do have in the county. And we did allocate a significant amount of additional resources into this line item for 2021. The aging and disability, so they are mostly grant funded also. They do have a property tax of $385,000, which was down slightly from the prior year. Their net wages and fringes are consistent, a little bit down from the prior year. And then their operating expenses are also down slightly from the prior year. 4920 is the administrative division within Health and Human Services. So we saw a larger increase here because they do have less grant funding options within the administrative part. They do charge back some of these amounts to the other programs, but we can see an increase in the amount of support there. The operating or the net wages and fringes was up by about $60,000. And if we look at the operating cost, it was up quite a bit, and part of the reason was a decreased amount of overhead. That's the chargeback we have for other departments. So we've decreased our expectation of that chargeback. So it becomes an extra cost for us. But I would rather be a little bit more conservative on the amounts that we charge back. If you overcharge and the state comes in and audits that, then you're going to have to repay it. So I would rather budget a little bit closer to where we should be charging rather than being too aggressive on that. Next is the healthcare campus. Any questions on HHS, I guess, before I move on to the healthcare campus? All right. So similar to HHS, we do a compilation. They have 3 divisions. We do add all 3 of those divisions together so you can kind of see the healthcare campus as a whole. The general property taxes are 0. So there's no property taxes that are used. I do see that I projected 2022 163. I'll have to fix that. There won't be any property taxes used to cover the healthcare campus. They do generate enough revenues to cover their operating expenses. So I will clarify that. So on a cash flow basis, not including depreciation, all of the revenues cover the expenses. The general fund, though, pays for the debt service on the healthcare campus building project. So the healthcare campus does not pay for debt service. But if you look at it from an operating cash flow perspective, which is how we reflect this budget, they balance. Their net wages and fringes are going up. You can see they went from 5.9 million up to 6.4 million. Some of that is the step increases and the benefit changes we have. The other part of that is higher staffing levels as we have higher occupancy rates within the buildings. We then break that out into the 3 divisions. So the oldest division is the skilled nursing facility, so that's 4210. They do make up the largest portion of the total cost also. That's where most of the beds are. So you can see the $5 million that we have budgeted there. One way to look at maybe the profitability of a division within the healthcare campus would be to look at the fund balance applied. So when we see a negative fund balance applied, and I highlighted that row, 49,310, that's the amount of revenues they're generating in excess of their expenses. So, from a classical standpoint, you would say that's their net profit. From a budgeting perspective, we want to reflect all the departments at 0, and so this is how we do it. So 77,416 is projected. When we actually apply it, you see there's no actuals under fund balance applied because it's really just an accounting holder is what it's there for. So we don't actually use that. So if you looked at the 2018 and 19 actuals, when we get down to the very bottom line, you'll see that they'll have report amount. Now those amounts are negative because depreciation and amortization are applied against those. So while we budget from a cash flow perspective, our actual books do reflect an accrual basis. And so it gets confusing, so I'll try to explain where those differences are when we see them, but I guess that's the best explanation I have for you at the moment. Kitty Rose is the 4230 cost center. This is about $1 million portion of the healthcare campus. And if we look at their fund balance applied, it's actually $804. So that'd be a loss. It's a positive number. It's a loss. So they're basically budgeted at break even for the Kitty Road Center. And then Orchard View. So they're about a $2 million piece of the healthcare campus, and they have a negative fund balance of $57,376. So that's their projected net profit out of this budget. Are there any questions on any of the healthcare campus budgets? Alrighty. Nope, I got one more. Veteran Services is the final one within this section. So Veteran Services is 4710. They're a relatively small department, so they have 269,000. They're up to 277,000. The main difference you're going to see is net wages and fringes went from 245 to 252. And then their operating expenses were actually down by just a couple $1,000s. Any questions on Veteran Services? Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Leah. All righty.
Okay, so next we'll have Register of Deeds. You can see they have a negative general property taxes, so they are generating more revenue than what their expenses are. And so that stayed relatively the same for this year. Their net wage and fringe just increased a little bit just due to the natural stuff increase there. Otherwise, their operating has remained relatively the same. Questions there? Go on to Parks is next. Their 2020 adopted budget was $450,000, and actually that went down this year to the recommended was $438,000. So you see that little bit of a decrease in the property taxes. The one major contribute to that is their park fees and rents. So if you see in the 2020 they were budgeted to receive about $250,000. If you look at their year-to-date number, it is $330,000. So they have exceeded those budgeted numbers for the revenue so far this year. And keep in mind, this is only up through the end of September. So we did increase those revenue dollars up to $300 for the upcoming year due to that increase in people going out and camping and getting outside more due to the recent pandemic. That's about the only thing I wanted to point out for you in parks. For resource land and water, you can see their adopted budget was about $297,000, and that has decreased this year to $132,000. And this big change is due to the cost sharing. If you go down to the end of the page here, those dollars did decrease from about $390,000 down to $225,000. And that is due to a decrease in program scope for resource land and water. If you have any further questions on that, I will refer that over to Ellen. Do you have any questions on those, on the decrease in that one? Okay. Next we have planning. This, so you can see they do not have any general property taxes. Their numbers have stayed relatively the same from 242 to 246. So it's just increased just a little bit, generally due to net wage and fringe for this department, and their operating expenses just went up slightly. So. Next we have zoning. They were at 1.5 million for 2020, and they just increased just slightly to about 1,560,000 for this year. Otherwise, they've stayed relatively the same. The increase to this one is generally due to the net wage and fringe increase for the year. Next is recycling. Recycling also does not have any general property taxes, and their budget actually went down, the revenues went down slightly for the upcoming year. Otherwise, no other real changes within this department. Next, we have hazardous waste. You see their operating budget is only $43,000 for 2020, and that it did increase for 2021 by about $10,000 up to $53,000. And the reason for this increase is due to the first line of expense there. The professional services went from $52,000 to $60,000, and that is due to increased recycling event fees for this department.
This is Supervisor Hall. May I ask a question?
Yes, Supervisor Hall.
Are we anticipating, since we were not able to do the clean sweeps this year, that we're going to have a greater need next year? Pardon my granddaughter.
Ellen, are you available to answer that question?
There, sorry, I just had trouble getting unmuted. Yes, I can. So this year we had to cancel the first clean sweep collection and we only held one in the fall. So that was part of what happened with this budget. Previous years, if you look at 18, 19, and you will see that collection costs had been going up. For this year, we budgeted $52,000, and we actually were quite concerned because disposal costs for the hazardous waste program had increased significantly. We actually went out for bid, and we still had a huge increase. So one of the things we did is we made a lot of changes in it this year, and raised our fees slightly, working through the Community Development Committee in order to try to stay within budget. Then the pandemic hit and we didn't hold the first collection. The second collection we did just hold a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. It was very well attended, and if we have two collections next year, despite the changes we've made, or probably in addition to them, we do expect the cost to keep climbing. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Next is the library fund. So you've seen this spreadsheet in past meetings. So this is just the distribution of that. If we go to the budget, you'll see that did increase from 1.1 to, well, 1,1,200,000 to, or 20,000 to 1.136. So that increase is due to circulation and that additional hotspots.
Judy Artroff with a question, because I know that we went through this, that Spring Valley and Woodville have a different cost for their hotspots, and I don't see that on here. How's that being handled?
It should be. We'll update the spreadsheet. I know it is in another different, it's in a different spreadsheet, so we'll go ahead and update this one in the packet.
Okay, thanks.
Next one is UW Extension. Their budget has remained relatively the same. They're just out by about a couple $1,000s for revenues. And then their operating expenses are just up slightly as well. So that budget has remained relatively the same.
Judy Artroff, another question?
Yes, Judy.
And I don't know if I'm going to say this diplomatically enough or exactly. Extension has changed. A lot of people where they were just in St. Croix County are now being shared by counties. So shouldn't our costs go down? I don't know, or is there something I'm not understanding?
Yeah, Supervisor Ostroff, we have a contract with UW Extension. That contract specifies the reimbursement rate that we'll pay to UW Extension and what those service deliveries are. So they did two things. One is they changed the formula. So we used to pay based upon the actual employee's wages and benefits, and they changed it to a position cost instead. So it doesn't matter whether the UW Extension agent we have has a family plan or single plan. So they gave us a flat dollar amount per position. So that was one change. And then the other change they've been making is they've been changing the cost sharing. So they give us half a position here, share it with another county there. So they've been able to avoid some of the increases we would have seen from the first change by doing the second change.
But we're still paying the same amount for less.
How do I say it diplomatically? So yes and no. I mean, we have less services from some positions, but our actual usage of those positions was probably about at that level. When they determined if we could fit a half position for a certain extension agent, it's because that was our service level demand. So I don't think that we've seen a decrease in service delivery from UW Extension because of those changes, but we have been able to avoid increases. I mean, we did this very specifically in meeting with the lead of the UW Extension and the county administrator, that we did not want to see cost increases. And so that's how we altered the FTEs of those positions to stay within our budgeted range.
Well, I just think it's something that should be looked at in the next few years about exactly what's going on. But
Ken, would you like me to address some of that?
Yes, please.
So the other change was, if you recall last year, we did, because community services also needed more support, we did add support to our budget, which we haven't had to do in the past. And so Extension is now, will have their own support within their own budget, and community development is retaining the other, the support that they were giving us they're retaining that in their budget. So that's also why you've seen an increase. So there was cost savings with the FTEs going down to 50%. There's only one position where that occurred. And that cost savings helped to fund this other, the support in our division without costs increasing our overall budget. Does that make sense?
yes and no. Oops, sorry. But, I mean, you know, we'll see what happens as time goes on. Thanks.
Any other questions? Next, we have the fairgrounds. So adopted budget in 20 was 80,000. There was 90,000 requested. County administrator's recommendation was 85,000 on that one. So that did go up by that $5,000. Any questions for the fairgrounds?
Judy Artroff again, I just want to say that even though in here it says year-to-date 60,000 for 2020, that's all they got. We lowered their 80 to 60. So that's one of the reasons for wanting a little extra help next year.
Okay, thank you. And the next one is economic development, and there's some supporting documentation on this. And then we'll go to the general property taxes remain the same for 2020 as into 2021. It's at 117,000. Expenses remained the same as well.
This is Supervisor Hall. May I ask a question?
Yes, Supervisor Hall.
Yeah, is economic development paying any rent on the facilities that they are using at the county for office space? Given that we're looking at having to be cramped as it is, I'm wondering about that, and I'm wondering, do these numbers reflect the proposed change of adding some money back in or not?
So no, they are not currently paying
Can we
rent.
mute that microphone with the kid in the background, please?
So no, they are currently not paying rent for the space here. And can you repeat the second half of that question, please?
So there was a discussion at the last meeting about potentially moving some monies into this account. I believe it was a significant amount of money that was not spent in a loan program. Do these numbers reflect any transfer of funds for that?
No, they do not.
I have a question about, on the additional documentation. When it talks about the budget income, it goes through municipal revenue, and I don't see the Village North Hudson on here. I don't know why, and I don't really know what this is.
So we operate as a membership-driven organization, public-private. Banks, utility companies, general contractors would be reflective of private sector member contributors to our organization. On the public side, of course, St. Croix County remains the biggest member contributor. And then we've got a core group of towns, villages, and cities that are members. And then there are slightly more than half or so of the remaining towns, villages, and cities that are considered non-members. We make a run every fall at their respective budget times to make a request to get in. And at this moment, during my tenure with the organization, North Hudson may have been a member one of those years. Subsequently, they have not been a member.
Okay, because I also serve on the village board of North Hudson, and I've never heard that before. So just wondering, I'll talk to my village president about that.
We direct the requests to town board chairs, village presidents, and mayors.
Okay, I'll check with Stan.
Supervisor Hanson, did you have a question?
Regarding Supervisor Hall's question, I think it would be probably relevant to have a conversation maybe after the first of the year, include, I think, asking hard questions about the large reserve fund of taxpayer money that the organization holds, and hard questions about the in-kind contribution by the county, and hard questions about the accountability of the organization for those contributions. However, I wouldn't question the $115,000 contribution that we make. We just leave the budget where it is, in my opinion.
Any other questions, comments? I'll turn it back over to Ken.
All right, I'm batting cleanup here, so we only got a few more pages to go. So on page 225 of the budget is the capital improvement projects. So we've been through this before. We've had a resolution that's adopted. It does become part of the budget, though. So 221 of the budget, I guess, if you look at the paper copies, 225 of the packet electronically. So the budget is here for those capital improvement projects. So if there's any questions on it, this is your last chance to review it before it gets to the public hearing and final adoption in a couple of weeks.
Judy again. What do I need to do, or does the board need to do, to ensure that the date that the original request was made is kept on every single KIP plan that the board sees? Is that possible?
Yes. So I will talk with our interim finance director, and we can get that added to the spreadsheet. Part of the problem, I know you've asked for that before, was historically, I don't know what some of them are. So we will fill in as many as we can, but I don't know if I'm going to have a number or a year for all of the requests.
I mean, this goes back to like with the LODOX, I believe. It's that, you know, every 2 years we have a lot of new members a lot of times on the board, and we come to this KIP and it's been dragging around for 4 or 6 years. It's time to get it done. But for new members, they don't know that. It's really important that we put the date down so people have an idea, you know, and especially for the new emergency vehicle. Things like that where I feel it's pretty vital that people know how long it has been discussed. It's not like it just popped up last year and we're rushing in to do it. It's been discussed and people have been hesitant, and we want to make sure we really need it, and it's important.
Yeah, well, and while I know that, you know, that would be one piece of information in evaluating a project, the project really does need to stand on its own. I mean, it's either a good project or it's not a good project. So that would be, how long it's been on the KIP list would be one factor, but it wouldn't be the only factor that I would recommend.
Agreed, but it could be an important factor.
Sure. Yeah, we will work on getting that, Judy.
But I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
You know, eventually I always do fulfill those requests that you have. Some are just more challenging. All right, and then the last section is debt. So this is really just the summary in total. This is where you can see that fund balance applied, though. There's $285,000 of fund balance applied to reduce the $6 million in payments we're going to make to a tax levy of $5.8 million. And then next year we'll be down to $5.7 million in payments. And then here's the last page is a spreadsheet of all of the debt that we have, principal and interest payments as they're scheduled out. So at this point, the county administrator recommended budget will continue on to the full county board at the November 3rd meeting. We'll have a public hearing, and then we'll introduce a resolution to adopt the budget and set this tax levy. If you had any recommended changes, though, and I pointed out a couple of small ones that I'm going to make, but if you had any additional recommended changes, now is really the best time to do it. If you try to do it at the public hearing, we can still do that. It's just a whole lot more work for me. So if you have any changes, I'd like to hear them now. And if not, I will turn it back over to the county board chair.
Thank you, Ken. Well presented. So the next item on the agenda then would be a request for future agenda items. Seeing none, announcements and correspondence? None. I'll adjourn this meeting, and the date of the next meeting will be as needed to be announced. Adjourn the meeting at 12:29.